Welcome to True Crime Threads, where the darkest stories unravel. Today, we dive into the chilling tale of an ex-FBI agent who snapped after catching his wife in a betrayal too deep to forgive. Jayden Hayes was a man who seemed to have it all. A former FBI agent with a decorated career, he had retired early to enjoy a quiet life with his wife Liliana in a picturesque suburban home. Their house was the kind of place people dreamed of, a cozy two-story with a white picket fence, surrounded by lush greenery and blooming flowers. Jayden and Liliana were the envy of their neighborhood, the couple everyone admired. Jayden, with his sharp jawline and piercing blue eyes, carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who had seen it all. Liliana, with her radiant smile and effortless charm, was the life of every gathering. Together, they appeared to be the perfect pair, a union built on trust, love, and mutual respect. But beneath the surface, cracks were beginning to form. Jayden had always been a private man, his years in the FBI shaping him into someone who valued control and precision. He was meticulous in everything he did, from the way he organized his tools in the garage to the way he planned their vacations, down to the last detail. Liliana, on the other hand, was a free spirit. An artist by trade, she thrived on spontaneity and creativity. Her studio, a sunlit room at the back of the house, was always a mess of paintbrushes, canvases, and half-finished projects. While Jayden found comfort in order, Liliana found beauty in chaos. At first, their differences complemented each other. Jayden admired Liliana's passion and zest for life, while she appreciated his stability and dependability. But over time, the gap between them began to widen. Jayden's long hours at the FBI had kept him away from home for much of their early marriage, and Liliana had grown accustomed to her independence. Now that he was retired and home more often, their contrasting lifestyles began to clash. Jayden wanted routine. Liliana craved adventure. He wanted quiet evenings at home. She wanted to go out and socialize. Jayden's suspicions started to grow when Liliana began spending more time away from home. She would leave early in the morning, claiming she needed inspiration for her art, and return late at night with vague explanations about meeting friends or visiting galleries. At first, Jayden tried to dismiss his doubts, chalking it up to Liliana's naturally social personality. But the nagging feeling that something was amiss wouldn't go away. He began to notice little things, the way she would quickly close her laptop when he entered the room, the unfamiliar perfume she sometimes wore, the way she seemed distracted during their conversations. One evening, Jayden decided to surprise Liliana by cooking her favorite meal. He spent hours preparing everything, setting the table with candles and flowers, hoping to rekindle the spark they had lost. But when Liliana walked through the door, she seemed distant, almost annoyed by the gesture. She picked at her food, barely making conversation, and excused herself early, claiming she was tired. Jayden sat alone at the table, staring at the untouched meal, feeling a growing sense of unease. That night, as he lay in bed, Jayden couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. His FBI training had taught him to trust his instincts, and right now, every fiber of his being was telling him that Liliana was hiding something. He tried to push the thoughts away, telling himself he was being paranoid, but the seed of doubt had been planted. Little did he know, his suspicions were about to lead him down a path he could never have imagined, a path that would change his life forever. Jayden's unease grew with each passing day. He found himself watching Liliana more closely, noticing the subtle changes in her behavior. She seemed more secretive, more distant, as if a part of her had already left their marriage. Her phone, which she used to leave carelessly on the kitchen counter, was now always in her hand or tucked away in her purse. She had started locking her studio door, something she had never done before. Jayden's mind raced with possibilities, each one darker than the last. He tried to convince himself that he was overthinking, that his years in the FBI had made him overly suspicious, but the gnawing feeling in his gut refused to go away. One weekend, Jayden decided to take a solo fishing trip to clear his head. He packed his gear early on a Saturday morning, leaving a note for Liliana on the kitchen counter. He hoped the time alone would help him sort through his thoughts and decide how to approach the growing tension between them. The trip was supposed to last 2 days, but by Sunday afternoon, Jayden found himself restless and eager to return home. He cut the trip short, arriving back at the house earlier than expected. As he pulled into the driveway, he noticed that Liliana's car was gone. This wasn't unusual. She often ran errands or met friends on weekends, but something about the empty driveway felt off. Jayden carried his gear inside, the house eerily quiet. He called out for Liliana, but there was no response. The silence was unnerving, and Jayden's instincts kicked in. He moved through the house methodically, checking each room for any sign of disturbance. When he reached the top of the stairs, he noticed the bedroom door was slightly ajar. His heart began to pound as he approached, his footsteps muffled by the thick carpet. He pushed the door open slowly, and what he saw inside shattered his world. Liliana was in bed with another man, their bodies entwined in a way that left no doubt about what was happening. The man was Marcus, a local gym trainer Liliana had mentioned in passing a few times. Jayden stood frozen in the doorway, his mind struggling to process the scene before him. For a moment, time seemed to stop. Jayden's chest tightened, and a wave of emotions crashed over him, betrayal, anger, and a deep, searing pain that cut through him like a knife. He wanted to scream, to confront them, to demand answers, but no words came. Instead, he turned and walked away, his movements mechanical, as if he were on autopilot. He descended the stairs, grabbed his car keys, and left the house without looking back. Jayden drove aimlessly for hours, his mind a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions. He replayed the scene over and over, each time feeling the sting of betrayal more acutely. He thought about all the signs he had missed, all the times Liliana had lied to him, and all the moments he had dismissed his suspicions. By the time he returned home, the house was empty. Liliana and Marcus were gone, leaving behind only the faint scent of her perfume and the lingering evidence of their betrayal. Jayden sat alone in the living room, the weight of what he had discovered pressing down on him. He felt a mix of emotions, anger, sadness, and a cold, calculating determination. His FBI training had taught him to remain calm under pressure, to think clearly even in the most chaotic situations. As he sat there in the silence, a plan began to form in his mind. He knew what he had to do. The betrayal had cut too deep, and there was no going back. Jayden Hayes, the man who had always followed the rules, was about to step into a darkness he had never imagined. Jayden's mind was a storm of emotions, but his training took over. He knew how to compartmentalize, how to push aside feelings and focus on the task at hand. The betrayal had cut deep, but now it was fuel for a plan that was already forming in his mind. He couldn't let this go. He couldn't just walk away. Liliana and Marcus had humiliated him, and they needed to pay. But Jayden wasn't the type to act impulsively. He was methodical, precise, and patient. He would make them suffer, but he would do it in a way that left no trace. The first step was gathering information. Jayden still had access to certain FBI databases, a privilege he had retained even after his retirement. He spent hours at his computer, digging into Marcus's background. What he found was both useful and infuriating. Marcus wasn't just a gym trainer, he had a history of shady dealings. There were rumors of illegal steroids, unpaid debts, and even connections to local drug dealers. Jayden's lips curled into a cold smile as he read through the files. Marcus was far from the upstanding citizen Liliana had made him out to be. He was a liability, and Jayden knew exactly how to use that to his advantage. Next, Jayden turned his attention to Liliana. He accessed their joint bank accounts and credit card statements, looking for any irregularities. It didn't take long for him to find what he was looking for. Over the past few months, Liliana had been withdrawing large sums of money, often in cash. There were also charges for expensive dinners, hotel stays, and even a weekend getaway to a luxury resort. Jayden's jaw tightened as he pieced together the timeline. Liliana had been funding Marcus's lifestyle, using their shared savings to do it. The betrayal stung even more now, knowing that she had not only cheated on him but had also stolen from him. With the information he had gathered, Jayden began to formulate his plan. He knew he couldn't act rashly. If he wanted to get away with this, he needed to be meticulous. He started by monitoring Marcus's routines. Using his old FBI surveillance skills, Jayden tracked Marcus's movements, noting the times he went to the gym, the routes he took home, and the places he frequented. Marcus was predictable, and that made him an easy target. Jayden also kept tabs on Liliana, watching as she continued her double life, oblivious to the fact that her husband was now her shadow. Jayden's plan was simple but brutal. He would make Marcus's death look like a drug deal gone wrong. It was the perfect cover. Marcus had the connections, the history, and the enemies to make it believable. Jayden began to gather the materials he would need, careful to leave no paper trail. He purchased a burner phone, untraceable gloves, and a set of tools he could use to stage the scene. He even planted false evidence in Marcus's apartment, ensuring that the police would have no reason to look beyond the obvious. As for Liliana, Jayden had something special in mind. He couldn't just kill her, that would be too easy. He wanted her to feel the same pain she had inflicted on him. He wanted her to know what it was like to lose everything. Jayden began to manipulate her subtly at first. He started leaving small, cryptic notes around the house, messages that hinted at his knowledge of her affair. He wanted to keep her on edge, to make her paranoid. He knew that fear was a powerful tool, and he intended to use it to its fullest. By the time Jayden was ready to put his plan into action, he felt a strange sense of calm. The anger was still there, simmering beneath the surface, but it was controlled now, channeled into something productive. He had thought of every detail, every possible outcome. There would be no mistakes, no loose ends. Jayden Hayes, the former FBI agent, was about to become something else entirely. A man who had been pushed too far, a man who would stop at nothing to get his revenge. The night Jayden chose to execute his plan was cold and moonless, the kind of night that seemed to swallow sound and light. He had waited patiently, biding his time until the perfect moment presented itself. Marcus, as predictable as ever, had returned to his apartment after a late shift at the gym. Jayden watched from the shadows as Marcus fumbled with his keys, clearly exhausted. The man had no idea what was coming, and that was exactly how Jayden wanted it. Once Marcus was inside, Jayden moved. He had already disabled the building's security cameras earlier in the week, a small but crucial detail in his meticulous plan. He approached the apartment door, his gloved hands steady as he picked the lock with ease. Inside, the apartment was dimly lit, the faint glow of a television casting flickering shadows on the walls. Marcus was in the kitchen, rummaging through the fridge, completely unaware of the danger lurking behind him. Jayden moved silently, his years of training making him a ghost in the room. Before Marcus could react, Jayden was on him, subduing him with a chokehold that left the man unconscious within seconds. There was no struggle, no fight, just the quiet efficiency of a man who knew exactly what he was doing. Jayden dragged Marcus's limp body to the living room, where he began to stage the scene. He planted drugs and cash in strategic locations, making it look like Marcus had been involved in a deal gone wrong. He even used a syringe to inject a small amount of heroin into Marcus's arm, ensuring that the autopsy would support the narrative. When he was satisfied with the setup, Jayden delivered the final blow, a single gunshot to the head, fired from a weapon he had stolen months ago and would soon dispose of. The sound was muffled by a suppressor, and the mess was minimal. Jayden took one last look around, making sure there was nothing out of place, no evidence that could link him to the crime. Then he slipped out of the apartment as quietly as he had entered, leaving Marcus's lifeless body behind. The next phase of his plan involved Liliana. Jayden knew he couldn't kill her in the same way. It would be too obvious, too risky. Instead, he decided to make her death look like an accident. He lured her to a remote cabin they had once visited together, a place filled with happy memories that now felt like a cruel joke. He called her, his voice calm and measured, and told her he wanted to talk, to try to salvage what was left of their marriage. Liliana, desperate to ease her guilt, agreed to meet him. When she arrived at the cabin, Jayden was waiting. He greeted her with a smile, his demeanor calm and reassuring. They sat by the fireplace, and for a moment, it almost felt like old times. But then Jayden's expression changed, his eyes cold and unreadable. Before Liliana could react, he struck her with a heavy object, knocking her unconscious. He carried her to the bathtub, where he staged the scene to look like a tragic slip and fall. He made sure there were no signs of struggle, no evidence of foul play. When he was done, he left the cabin, driving away into the night as if nothing had happened. The next morning, Jayden reported Liliana missing, his performance as the distraught husband flawless. He cooperated fully with the police, answering their questions with a mixture of grief and confusion. When Liliana's body was eventually found, the authorities ruled her death an accident, just as Jayden had planned. Marcus's death was quickly linked to his involvement in the drug trade, and the cases were closed with little fanfare. Jayden played his part perfectly, attending the funerals and receiving an outpouring of sympathy from friends and neighbors, but inside he felt no remorse. To him, justice had been served. He had taken back control, avenged the betrayal, and ensured that no one would ever know the truth. Or so he thought. Little did he know, his carefully constructed world was about to unravel in ways he could never have anticipated. For weeks after the deaths of Liliana and Marcus, Jayden lived in a strange, hollow calm. The funerals had come and gone, the condolences had been offered, and life in the neighborhood had returned to its usual rhythm. Jayden played the part of the grieving widower flawlessly, his stoic demeanor earning him sympathy and respect. But beneath the surface, a storm was brewing. He began to notice small, unsettling things that made him question whether he had truly gotten away with his crimes. It started with his car. One morning, he found the tires slashed, deep gashes running through the rubber. At first, he thought it might be random vandalism, but the precision of the cut suggested otherwise. A few days later, he returned home to find his front door slightly ajar, the lock picked with expert precision. Nothing was stolen, but the message was clear: someone had been inside. Jayden's FBI instincts kicked in, and he swept the house for bugs or cameras but found nothing. The intruder had left no trace, only the chilling knowledge that they had been there. Then came the notes. They started appearing in unexpected places, tucked under his windshield wiper, slipped into his mailbox, even left on his kitchen counter. Each one contained the same chilling message: "I know what you did." The handwriting was neat and deliberate, giving no clues about the sender. Jayden's initial confidence began to waver. He had been so careful, so meticulous in covering his tracks. How could anyone know the truth? Paranoia set in. Jayden found himself looking over his shoulder constantly, jumping at every sound. He began to suspect everyone, his neighbors, his old colleagues, even the barista at the coffee shop he frequented. He started carrying a gun, something he hadn't done since his FBI days. He installed security cameras around his house, but they captured nothing out of the ordinary. The threats continued, each one more unnerving than the last. One night, as Jayden sat alone in his living room, the power went out. The sudden darkness sent a jolt of fear through him. He grabbed his gun and moved cautiously through the house, his heart pounding in his chest. As he reached the kitchen, a shadowy figure appeared at the window, their face obscured by the darkness. Jayden froze, his finger hovering over the trigger. The figure stood there for what felt like an eternity, then vanished as quickly as they had appeared. Jayden rushed outside, but there was no one there, only the faint sound of footsteps fading into the night. The next morning, Jayden found another note on his doorstep. This one was different. It contained a single word, soon. The brevity of the message was more terrifying than anything that had come before. Jayden realized that he was no longer the hunter. He had become the hunted. Someone was playing a dangerous game with him, someone who knew his secrets and was determined to make him pay. Jayden's carefully constructed life began to unravel. He stopped sleeping, his mind racing with possibilities. He became increasingly isolated, avoiding contact with anyone who might ask too many questions. He tried to retrace his steps, to figure out where he might have slipped up, but the answers eluded him. The weight of his guilt and fear pressed down on him, threatening to crush him. In the end, Jayden realized that there was no escape. The person stalking him wasn't just after revenge. They wanted him to suffer, to feel the same fear and helplessness he had inflicted on others. As he sat alone in his darkened house, gun in hand, Jayden understood that his past had finally caught up with him. The question was no longer whether he would be caught, but when. And when the moment came, would he be ready to face the consequences of his actions? The documentary ends with this haunting question, leaving viewers on the edge of their seats, wondering if justice or something far darker will finally catch up to Jayden Hayes.